You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley Fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Coursey.
And welcome to another great episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. Joining me today, our guest is Katelynn Martinez, who is the Director of Operations and Business Development for OneCanopy. Welcome, Katelynn.
Hi, Josh. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm glad we were able to put this together. We had previously scheduled this to occur in April 10th, I think we were going to visit, and I had something come up, and so I'm glad we can circle the wagons and get back to this. This is to me a very important topic, and I want folks that might not know who OneCanopy is, by the time we're done here, I think they're going to have a lot more insight to that, and I think we're also going to have a lot more insight to the mission, the goals. Obviously, Kevin Brinkman, the proprietor and owner and founder of OneCanopy, has put together a vision that is certainly led by passion. But why don't you unpack that for us, Katelynn? Just maybe give folks the 30,000-foot view of OneCanopy to get started.
Yeah, of course. OneCanopy is a reforestation company focused on growing native and climate-adapted plant material for the Rocky Mountain region. Right now, we're based out of Loveland, Colorado, 34,000 square feet of greenhouse space. But for us, this is just the beginnings. Right now, we're producing about 500,000 trees a year, but we anticipate for that number to grow exponentially. And then our hope is that we really become a one-stop shop for reforestation. So really addressing all of the issues within what we call the reforestation pipeline. So that's everything from project finance to everything involving seed collection, seed storage, seed cleaning, nursery production, project management. So who's helping to organize, get these trees in the ground? And then, of course, post-project monitoring to make sure that our plantings are successful.
All right. So when you talk about focusing on growing native trees and shrubs, specifically suited for the Rocky Mountain region, where was this inspiration that Kevin had to bring this to fruition? What really is the motivator behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kevin, background on Kevin. Kevin's actually a commercial real estate guru here in the Rocky Mountain region. He was born and raised in northern Colorado, and as such has been witness to decades of catastrophic wildfires here across the Front Range, from the Hayman fire in the early 2000s to more recently the 2020 fires, East Troublesome and Cameron Peak fire here in northern Colorado, that together make Colorado's largest wildfire. And so after the 2020 fires, he was motivated to really do something in this space. And so in 2021, when he was doing some of his research, the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service produced an article that outlined all the issues in that reforestation pipeline. So everything from project financing to post-project monitoring. The results were pretty damning. When we're looking at the United States, we have this huge demand for trees, particularly in the Western United States. When we're looking at the Western United States, the Nature Conservancy estimates that we have a need for about 4.6 billion trees. So about 15 million acres of total land just in the West, or the Rocky Mountain West, actually. And so when we're looking at how do we fulfill this need for trees, the current nursery capacity can only meet about 20% of that demand. When Kevin started to think and envision what a reforestation company might look like here in the Rocky Mountain region, it was pretty apparent that nursery production would be our first step in that pipeline.
Yeah, that's fascinating in itself. OneCanopy certainly is designed and has pursued filling that critical gap, supplying vital plant material for government agencies, nonprofits, conservation districts, carbon credit companies, private landowners, conservation groups. What are the moving parts of that and how that actually goes from being in the nursery to on the ground? I know there's a lot of moving parts there, but let's talk about that process.
As we've seen, we recently had this movement in the United States where we have all this, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Bill and Ira money trickling down through the pipeline. And so now for the first time, I think maybe ever, those of us who are working in this conservation space suddenly realize cash is maybe not the issue, but some of the issues that we're seeing within that pipeline, aside from nursery production, is workforce development. We really don't have enough people doing this work right now throughout out that pipeline. We don't have enough seed collectors. We don't have enough people storing seed or cleaning seed. First, we don't have enough people growing out plant material. And then we don't have enough planters or even project managers. And so part of the complication to getting trees in the ground is one, having the people, and then two, coordinating all of those moving pieces. So making sure that we have the appropriate seed when that project becomes shovel ready so that we can grow out the plant material. And then making sure that we have the planters to actually do the work. Not to mention, in the West, all the crazy jurisdictional boundaries that we have. So you have U.S. Forest Service trying to work with private landowners, or the BLM trying to work with nonprofit groups. All of this adds layers of complications to this, but ultimately, it's the reality for us here in the West.
Certainly, these trees will contribute to wildlife habitat restoration, improve river health after wildfires, prevent soil erosion. How many trees does OneCanopy? What is the goal? I assume there's a goal that you have, not just maybe a yearly goal or an annual goal, but also long-term vision. What is the goal that OneCanopy really fits and fills this gap that seems to be very prevalent?
Yeah, so I think near term, we're looking at being able to produce around 1 to 2 million trees in the next 3 to 5 years, which is really, we're hoping to maximize the property and the infrastructure that we currently have. And then from there, sky's really the limit. We say that we're aiming to be the largest seedling tree producer in the Rocky Mountain region in the next 5 years. But if I'm being honest, that's the low bar. Once we hit 1 million trees per year, we've already reached that mark. And so my hope for OneCanopy is that we're producing millions of trees a year, but when we're producing those trees, that the majority of them are actually being grown with a intended destination in mind. Right now, about 50% of our palette is speculative. So we're trying to anticipate what the demand might be and what the market might need based on different catastrophic events that have happened in recent years. However, I would really love it if I could see the majority of our business being contract-based. So we have these project managers with boots on the ground anticipating what projects might be coming down their pipeline for the next 3 to 5 years, and then we're able to meet that need here in the nursery.
What kind of trees are you growing there at the nursery?
Yeah, great question. When we talk about OneCanopy, we talk about trees and reforestation, but really it's all sorts of plant material that's native to the Rocky Mountain region. So we grow everything from conifers to upland deciduous plants like willows and chokecherries and native plums to shrubs like golden currant or big sage. And then we'll even do forbs and grasses, pretty much anything that grows in the Rocky Mountain region, native and or climate adapted. So one good example of that would be Austrian pine is obviously a non-native to the Rocky Mountain region, but it thrives here in the Rockies because it's just a really hardy plant, especially up in the Wyoming area. And we have a lot of customers who are demanding this. So that's something that will grow that's technically a non-native. However, it's a non-invasive as well. And so we see that as a good fit and in alignment with our mission and vision.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Katelynn. When you talk specifically about mule deer in the world that I operate within, and you talk about healthy habitat and landscapes that provide for healthy habitat for sustainable deer herds, mountain mahogany and bitterbrush seem to always be the key plant species or forward and forage species that come to mind. Is that an offering as well with OneCanopy?
Absolutely. So mountain mahogany, bitterbrush, and like I said earlier, we do a ton of sage. And recently, just this last fall, we had about 6,000 sage go up onto BLM land for mule deer winter foraging habitats. Really the whole gamut. We have some partners now down in the Gunnison area that are looking to plant forb grouse chicks for them to have food via the seeds of those forbs.
Yeah, that's outstanding. And you are certainly filling a gap a critical gap, I would say, that is needed. When you talk about the amount of different trees and plants and offerings within that realm of what you're able to provide, what about the acres that you've already been able to have an impact with already this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. Acres is on the order of thousands, which is really exciting for us. And the types of projects span the whole gamut. You know, for context, last year, our largest order was about 200,000 trees. And these were mostly conifer trees going to a large burn scar in the southern part of Colorado. And when we're thinking about 200,000 trees leaving the property, again, that's thousands of acres, but that's also 2 semi-loads full of trees. And then in contrast, our smallest size order is about about 25 trees. So that's really to help serve the small private landowner who might be planting these trees themselves on their own property. So really quite the contrast, not only in terms of acres impacted, but also size of orders and numbers of trees.
Yeah, that's a great segue. I was just going to go there. If obviously, and we talked about some of the folks that OneCanopy is working with, government agencies, nonprofits, conservation districts, conservation groups, but you just mentioned private landowners. So consumer direct business opportunities are certainly there for OneCanopy with a private landowner to approach you. What about the educational component where that seems to be something that's missing? In fact, I just visited with a gentleman a couple of weeks ago from Meeker, Colorado at the Mile High Hunt and Fish Expo who said, hey, I've got 2,600 acres of land. I've seen a serious decline of mule deer on my property. I'm looking for a source or somebody with some expertise that could maybe evaluate my property and talk to me and share with me what I can do to help improve this property to be good habitat and my stewardship responsibilities for wanting to see a recovery of mule deer in what was certainly obviously taken a hit by from the winter of 22-23. Do you offer those type of services, or is that something that you're happy to facilitate and have those conversations about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say probably close to 20% of my job personally is talking to folks like that gentleman and helping them to understand their landscape a little bit more, helping them to identify maybe past conditions, but also what their goals and objectives are for the future of that landscape. And most of our private landowner sales, I would say, come with a quote unquote free consultation. So usually that's me or maybe Josh on the phone with folks, walking them through the process. And that's everything from guiding on what types of species that they may want to plant that align with their landscape and their goals, all the way to proper planting techniques, densities at which they should plant, the whole gamut. The great thing about OneCanopy is that everyone we have here on staff is a trained ecologist. So not only do we have expertise in growing plant material native to this region, but we also have a lot of expertise on land management in the Rocky Mountain region.
Oh, that's fabulous. I certainly think that adds credibility and validity to what OneCanopy can provide. It's not like
Absolutely.
Field of Dreams. It's not build it and they'll come, plan it and they'll come. There's a lot more to that. There's a lot of science involved there when you talk about density. Talk me through some of that, and you pick the species of what you offer and maybe just explain the intricacies and the challenges that make it a little bit more simple than, or more complicated than what may just be perceived to be simple, that you buy it and you put it in the ground. That there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're thinking about, let's say, somebody who, instead of tree species, I'll focus a little bit more on ecosystem types. So let's think about somebody who may have property on the Front Range of Colorado, and it's lower elevation ponderosa pine dominant forests. So they may be looking at their forest, maybe they experienced a burn in recent years and they're not seeing any regeneration, which is a pretty common story that we hear here at OneCanopy. And so they're looking to reforest. One of the things I would ask them is, how many trees do you think you lost in the last fire? And how big is their acreage, right? Trying to get an understanding for, was their property a little bit overly dense? If so, I typically suggest to people planting in the order of 200 to 300 trees. And for a small private landowner, I'm typically recommending plant in waves or in segments. So the first year, I usually recommend for a small private landowner who's never done this, planting between 25 and 50 trees per acre, even just stopping at 50 trees if you have multiple acres, because it's surprisingly difficult to plant these little trees. You know, the trees that we grow only have about an 8-inch root ball and have about 8 inches of above ground mass. So they're really little compared to something that you might get from Home Depot or your local nursery supply store. However, with the harsh soil that we have here in the Rocky Mountain region, planting 50 of those little trees gets tiring very quickly. Not only that, but our trees are made so that you basically plant them and then hopefully forget about them. You try to be mindful of different microclimates, so that might include making sure that the tree has a little bit of shade provided on its south side so that it's not getting desiccated by the sun, whether it be in the summer or the winter. Maybe put it using your boot to make a little divot on the downhill side of the tree to help capture water. All those things can go a long way in helping these trees survive. However, mortality is almost impossible to avoid with these little trees. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So part of our education is walking people through this expectation that some of these trees may die. But as a private landowner, I'm guessing that most people don't want to spend their summers walking around with a watering can, watering hundreds of trees each week to make sure they survive. So really, the key to success is those microclimates and expecting some mortality. And then, of course, when we're thinking about density across their landscape, we're trying to keep that mortality in mind as well. And also, we're hoping to create a stand condition that they maybe don't have to go in the next 10 years and actually thin. We're hoping to create an ecosystem that might be a little bit more resilient to fire in the future. So that can be done through how we manage density, so how dense we plant that area, or it can be done with maybe we decide we're going to introduce a few more native species that maybe aren't found at that elevation. So maybe previously, so maybe we try a little bit of Douglas fir, maybe we try a little bit more of a shrub heavy planting rather than tree heavy, considering that the climate may continue to change and be hotter and drier.
Yeah, that's a lot of great information, Katelynn. I'm curious, is there an equation through experience in past plantings where you've been able to come up with an average, if you will, on the success of what is planted and the probability of it being able to not only thrive, but also what that loss looks like? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? Or is it vary so much that it's hard to do?
It does vary a lot, and it varies based on ecosystem type, and it also varies on who's doing the planting. So obviously experienced planters have much higher success rates, which is part of the reason why I suggest to private landowners to do this in waves, because each year or each time you plant, you're only going to get better at it, and you're going to learn from all those nuances. Like, oh, maybe I used this type of shovel, and for whatever reason, these plants didn't do as well, but when I used a different type of shovel, they worked really well. Maybe it has something to do with the hole that you're digging. But overall, when we're thinking about mortality, it can range anywhere from 40 to 80%. But I would say by and large, 70 is a really good average. So most people can expect about 70% survival of the plants that they plant.
Is there a better time of year where you've seen success increase exponentially because it was done early in the spring or?
Yeah, absolutely. Springtime, it always gets people excited, especially here in the Rocky Mountain region where I feel like everybody is excited to get their hands dirty after a long, cold winter with lots of snow. However, unless you're planting in true spring, so depending on where you are, like the Front Range of Colorado where I am today, we're starting to get a little bit too late for some of these native species plantings. It's been really dry for a few weeks. We did just get done with a great snowstorm, so maybe that'll help. But in more northern latitudes, this might be true spring. Just as the snow is melting is really when you want to plant if you're planting in the spring. However, the data suggests that fall planting in the Rocky Mountain region is much more beneficial, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first reason being that your soil temperatures are a lot higher in the fall and will remain higher even after the first frost or snowfall into the wintertime versus the spring, right? Our soil temperatures right now are just starting to warm up. And then aside from soil temperature, it's really a story about precipitation. So by and large in the Rocky Mountain region, we can expect winter precipitation more than we can spring precipitation. So planting in the Rockies in late September through mid-October typically sees the highest results in survivability.
That's fascinating. I'm curious when you talk about planting and the benefits of this, not only for the ecosystem, but then also some social benefits. I know in Wyoming that there has been a concentrated effort to plant, if you will, living snow fences. And I'm sure that's a relationship that could be done with conservation districts, potentially even with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. Is there a recommendation on that, or have you seen or have had some involvement where you've had some good success in being able to really dial that in to know what would work?
Yeah, so the nature of this work always lends itself to partnerships, right? We're managing collective resources when we're thinking about land, even if it's private land, right? Like the impacts on that land impact all of us. And what I found is that the conservation districts here in the Western United States are huge advocates for the private landowners in their jurisdictions. And so we always encourage private landowners to touch base with them first. The great thing about if private landowners go to those conservation districts, maybe in comparison to directly to us is that they can get much more locally specific advice, right? Those conservation districts can recommend species that maybe we at OneCanopy aren't aware of that grow in that area. And then they also know the conditions of that area a lot closer. So maybe they know what leads to a successful planting versus not in that specific climate. So those conservation districts are a huge advocate for private landowners. The other great thing is that usually if private landowners go through the conservation districts, they're still buying trees from us most of the time, or maybe a group of nurseries in the Western United States. However, they're going to be supporting their conservation districts in doing that, and then therefore just bolstering the local programs that are available to them.
Very good. That's really a collaboration and support and partnerships, and that's what makes conservation work. I do believe that wholeheartedly.
And this is just such a big issue that we can't just depend on one entity or organization to take control and help us to solve it, right? We all have to play a role.
What are the new seedlings or new products that OneCanopy is looking to offer within its repertoire of what it currently has or has had since it started?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we're really focused on nursery production, obviously, but we're looking to expand our shrub offering because we see a huge niche for that. A lot of the tree or nursery producers here in the Rocky Mountain region who are producing at scale, one, may only sell to federal entities because they themselves are a federal entity, and two, may really focus on conifer species. And so we're really looking to expand into shrubs, understanding that a lot of our shrublands here in the Western United States is at risk right now due to climate change or overuse or overgrazing. And then we also are looking to expand our deciduous palette. So that can include a larger variety of willows, a larger variety of cottonwoods, what have you. And then really where I see OneCanopy going the next, let's say 24 months is either moving into seed potentially or moving into plantings themselves. We're bookend by those two parts of the pipeline. Seed availability is something that we're consistently thinking of here at OneCanopy. And to be frank, there are not nearly enough collectors out there doing the work. And what's shocking, which we all know, is that we can't have a nursery without seed, right? And seed is the most critical part to what we do here at OneCanopy. And so we see it as our duty to really explore and see how we can positively impact that market as well.
Boy, I can see a tremendous amount of growth, interest, and support for this. OneCanopy certainly is a privately funded conservation nursery. I assume there aren't many out there. Is that a fair assessment?
No. Yeah, that's a fair assessment. There are private nurseries out there, of course, and native nurseries at that, but a lot of the native private nurseries are operating on much smaller scales and really are focused on serving more of the landscaper or the private homeowner, a much smaller scale, whereas we're looking for those really large projects or just really niche projects, right? We have a lot of customers who are coming to us who bring seed that they collected from the site that they're looking to restore. And so that's what we would call in the industry provenance of seed. And so we have some customers who are very particular about provenance of seed, the National Park Service being one of them. And so they'll bring us their seed to grow out for them. Those trees or plant material then gets returned to them to plant. And when we're thinking about private nurseries, we're some of the only that will do that at that scale. In contrast, when we're looking at maybe federal or state-funded nurseries in the Rocky Mountain region, a lot of those nurseries are looking for really large projects, right? So they're talking about the order of tens of thousands of one individual species. Where we meet that niche is we actually can grow some of those smaller quantities that are more particular for our customers. We are sitting in a sweet spot of being in between what you would consider your everyday private nursery versus your large federal or state nurseries.
Terrific information, Katelynn. When ordering and looking on the website, do you have a list or an inventory of what is in stock, what is available, the quantities? And when you start talking about different pine trees, there are multiple different offerings. When you talk about conifers, when you talk about sagebrush, there are some that just do better in certain places because they're native to that, and it's not just buy one, it works for all. That expertise, that information, that certainly is, I would think, a key component for being able to offer great customer service and being able to help and ask those questions, what works where and how, and the likelihood of being able to have it withstand. I know that there has been a lot of interest in aspen particularly
Yes.
in Wyoming, aspen and the patrician areas that provides for mule deer in the spring. I noticed on the website that quaking aspen particularly, is not something in inventory right now. Are you seeing a demand for that, or is it just not something you've been able to bring to fruition?
Honestly, I'm confident that we could fill our whole greenhouse with deciduous species like aspen or cottonwood and willow, and we would sell out every year. I would say that of the species that we grow, that is the most in demand. So if folks are interested in that, the best way to guarantee that we will have the species that you need is to call us up and actually place a contract order so that we grow specifically for you. And the great thing about OneCanopy, we're a social enterprise. And what that really means is any profit that we make here at OneCanopy gets reinvested back into the company. And that allows us to make decisions based on impact rather than money. And so when we're thinking about impact, and especially when we're thinking about contract orders, we work with our customers to the fullest extent when it comes to payment. So if you want to put in a contract order today for material that you think you're going to need in the fall, I would welcome you to do so. And we do not accept payment until time of delivery. And so if something happens in that time period, especially if you're contracting a species that I know we can sell, such as aspen, to others, if something happens to your project, let's say the county doesn't approve it or some funding falls through, we can either hold on to that material if you think you're going to get all of those parts and pieces in order for the next planting season, or we can just say, hey, no big deal, and sell that material to somebody else. So all of that said, the best way to guarantee that something, especially like aspen or cottonwoods or willows, is available for you is to make sure you reach out and actually contract order that stuff with us.
Terrific. All right, Katelynn, let's talk about how folks reach out to you and the best way to do that and pursue that conversation.
So on our website, we have a request quote form, and that request quote form is great, especially for the small private landowner who might only be looking for 25 trees. So that's where I would recommend you start. And then our inventory on our website is updated daily. And so you should be able to see live time quantities. That said, sometimes stuff is selling really fast on a particular day. So by the time I get to your quote, we may have already been sold out. So I would just ask that you bear with us on that. And then if you're looking for larger contract type material, or you're what I would consider a partner in conservation, so maybe you work for a nonprofit, a conservation district, a federal entity, maybe you have your own private consulting firm, those are all what we would consider partners. I would recommend that you actually reach out to us via our contact form on the website, and just a box that can explain a little bit more. I would take advantage of that, tell us a little bit about your project, and then one of us here at OneCanopy will get back to you within 72 hours.
Oh, that's great, Katelynn. And the website?
The website is www.one-canopy.com.
One-canopy.com. OneCanopy, a conservation nursery located in Loveland, Colorado, just minutes from I-25. Outstanding information, Katelynn. I do appreciate your time today. Anything we didn't cover?
No, Josh, I super appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today, and I look forward to working with folks in the industry and private landowners throughout the Rocky Mountain region to meet this critical need.
You said it. It is a critical need, and OneCanopy is certainly a leader in seedling production for nonprofits, government entities, and other groups working for conservation, and healthy habitat benefits all, not just mule deer, not just us socially, but all of our wildlife resources. So, yeah, you're filling a very critical gap, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the vision that Kevin Brinkman had. I think I seen in his YouTube video, he said, the time is now, and you're right. Katelynn, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to visit with you today. Thanks for being a guest on Wild Things and Wild Places.
Likewise, Josh. Thank you.
All right, that'll wrap up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. Again, Katelynn Martinez, the Director of Operations and Business Development for OneCanopy. If you get a chance, reach out to them. Check out their website. There's some great tutorial videos as well and some YouTube links. one-canopy.com.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a muley fanatic.